I DNF'd a book last night that I swear to God I had seen multiple people talk about being a weird sci-fi horror, but read like a Red Tower romantasy, but sci-fi. Well, I mean, all sci-fi, or most sci-fi, is magic dressed up as science. It was in space. Anyway, this has been a reminder of how incredibly subjective the word weird is and how few people I can trust with it. Hi, I'm Kindred, also known as Feed the Writer. I did not sleep well last night, but regardless, this is my reading journey for February 2025. I've been in a real mood for sci-fi since Christmas, and I have DNF'd 3 sci-fi books since then, which is a little bit upsetting. But thankfully, my first completed read of February really came through on that front and gave me some solidly enjoyable spacey sci-fi. And that book was The Last Watch by J.S. Hughes. The Last Watch takes place on a warship that has been decommissioned and turned into a military outpost at the very edge of the universe. It's populated entirely by disgraced military personnel who have been sent out here on shit-kicker duty to basically be forgotten and die. Their official job is to monitor the Divide, which is the literal edge of the universe, which, as you can imagine, doesn't have a whole heap going on. So everyone knows they've been sent there as punishment. It's basically a floating prison upon which you may never get off. We follow 2 point of view characters in this book. One is the war hero who captains the floating prison. Nobody knows what she's done to end up there, but they assume it is real fucking bad, and therefore they respect her enormously. The other is the heir to the intergalactic corporate empire who has really badly pissed off the head of the intergalactic corporate empire and been sent away to hopefully die. He is the only non-military person on this ship. The story begins with his arrival on the ship and the unrelated but subsequent contracting of the universe, which, as you can imagine, is bad news for everyone in the universe, but particularly the people stationed at the edge of it. This book isn't doing anything particularly groundbreakingly new. It's very stock standard, scrappy former military band has to save what remains of humanity. It's very Mass Effect, it's very Battlestar Galactica, but it's an incredibly solid and really enjoyable example of just such a staple sci-fi subgenre. The characters are really well drawn and have great chemistry together. Their voices are really distinct but not quirky, and the dynamics of this scrappy band are really well balanced between our 2 POV characters. Obviously, with our war hero, she has known all of these people for a really long time, and our disgraced heir is meeting everyone for the first time. And the way his relationships build and unfold in particular, especially with the other POV character, is just done really well. It keeps pace with the narrative, which is to say that they are in an extremely high stress situation, and so a lot of feelings are heightened, a lot of connection is required very quickly, but it's not rushed. We don't skip steps to, oh, suddenly he's pally with these people. J.S. Hughes isn't rushing the formation of this band or their affection for each other, which I appreciate so much. The dialogue really sparkled in this book for me. I think J.S. Hughes really understands the art of conversation. The pace is snappy and the world building is just never dumped on you. It's also, so far, doing something that I prefer to see in my military sci-fi, which is that it is anti-military. Through our war hero character, we are slowly but surely critiquing the military and all of the things it tends to glorify in a good soldier. And through our disgraced heir of the corporate universe, we are, shockingly, critiquing a whole bunch of capitalism, automation, profit-seeking, propaganda. Like I said, this isn't reinventing the wheel. This is very much just the kind of space opera sci-fi you think of when you hear the word space opera sci-fi, or at least military space opera sci-fi. It's definitely lacking any of the camp that might come with, say, your Flash Gordons or, you know, Star Wars. But this is exactly what I have been in the mood for. I flew through this, and I mean, last month I was just talking about how crap my focus has been. I focused so hard for 500 pages, and I have ordered books 2 and 3, which I hope will be here in the next couple days. Do I have critiques of this book? Yes. One character is so obviously doomed that by the time they finally kind of died, I was pretty checked out on them in general. And maybe that's why I found their death scene to be one of the more kind of emotionally hollow scenes in the book, but I don't know if that's the case. I feel like this particular character and their interaction / relationship with one of the main characters was one of the weaker parts of this book, and I am glad that we are moving on without them. That said, I'm not mad about their inclusion. Like, I don't think this is a character that should have been edited out. I just sort of wished that their scenes had a little bit more oomph, I guess. The death scene was very, there's a camera on us and we're following a script rather than these are human emotions that we are experiencing. I don't know, it was weird. It was quite jarring. Some of the action went on a bit, and I am begging authors of sci-fi to stop using Greek and Roman words and mythological figures for everything. I just don't think we need Eris stations and Apollo gates in every sci-fi. God, what was one I was reading last year? One had a whole society that named themselves after Icarus because they lived close to the sun. There's got to be other words. There's got to be other words. You make ones up. But yeah, no, aside from those minor elements, I really enjoyed this. I'm really excited to read the rest of the trilogy and JSG's other standalone book. I think it's a standalone. I've already forgotten what it's called. Yep, no, I've forgotten what it's called. It'll be on the screen somewhere as I'm speaking. And it could wear off, but it has encouraged me to follow this sci-fi thread forwards, which is why I was reading what I thought was a sci-fi horror last night, but was not, or at least was not particularly in the 41% that I read. But it's okay, because the other book that I'm currently reading is a collection of sci-fi, well, spec fic with a sci-fi flavor, short stories, and they are absolutely fantastic so far, and I cannot wait to share more about that with you when I finish it. So yeah, is it too soon to call this Sci-Fi-Bruary? Huh? We'll see. Good news, I finished that short story collection, and I think it might be my favorite book of the year so far. Granted, I have only read 9, but I still think we're onto a bit of a winner. Only the Astronauts by Kindred is a collection of short stories that examine the objects that humans have sent into space from a speculative sci-fi angle. Every story in this collection is told from the perspective of a different space-bound object. They are all sentient, except one, who is possessed by the spirit of Neil Armstrong, and they all have really strong personalities. In the first story, we meet Starman, who is the crash test dummy that Elon Musk launched into space strapped to a convertible car. Starman's story is one of heartbroken determination, as we learn that he is trying to win back the affection of the lover who jilted him. That being Elon Musk. The second story introduces us to the International Space Station, who in the year 2030 something has been officially decommissioned and is about to be scuttled by their final crew. Their story is an incredibly beautiful tribute to the many crews of astronauts and cosmonauts they've had over the decades, while simultaneously their final crew is paying tribute to the ISS. It actually reminded me a lot of Orbital by Samantha Harvey in just sort of tone and concept, but I actually liked this one better. I thought it was slightly more subtle, and maybe I just appreciate the whimsy of the story being narrated by the International Space Station. This one is called Requiem. It made me cry, which was some real emotional whiplash from Starman, which was very funny. And yet it wasn't a jarring shift, which is something that I find Cara Twindovi is doing really, really well in this collection, because there are 5 stories in here and they do really oscillate between funny and incredibly emotional. I think the recurring thread of earnest surrealism really helps. The 3rd story is called The Fallen Astronaut, and this is where we get Neil Armstrong's spirit trapped inside a little statue of an astronaut on the moon. This is another beautiful one where Neil is reflecting on kind of the gap between his perception of the significance of his trip to the moon and the moon landing and the public perception of it. There is a lot of humor in the way he discusses his relationship with Buzz Aldrin, in that very old man frenemies kind of way. And then just a lot of beauty in the way he tries to talk about the moon. And I say try because, as Neil says in the book, it is difficult to speak of a place that has so little language. But once upon a time, there were no words for creeks, streams, oceans, hills, forests, mountains on Earth. Slowly, humans had to find the right words. I am trying now to do the same. This is the story where I cracked out my highlighter because I just found it really beautifully done. It's such an interesting balance of regret and awe. Why did Buzz and I not lie down right away when we got here and make moon dust angels in the soil? Why did we not kiss the moon rocks to see if they were still warm, place them down each other's spines, grounding ourselves in a new world? Whew. Anyway, we go from that to a screenplay written by the granddaughter of Sally Ride's last surviving tampon. It's called The Tamponauts. It is a screenplay about a fictional... Okay, so Sally Ride's tampon's granddaughter is pitching her grandmother a screenplay in which there is a tampon astronaut mission to Mars, and she wants her grandmother to play the main tamponaut. Yep. This is by far the silliest story in the collection, and I would argue that it goes on a little bit too long, but it is very, very funny. And it is also amazing the way it kind of, not explicitly, but also very clearly explores the kind of just horror of this astronaut, Sally Ride, being the first American woman to go to space, and this absolute fuck up with her tampons has been something that has defined her for decades after. Like, it's an extremely valid and stern criticism of these scientific men who were so perplexed and disgusted by the concept of periods, but also, I think, a real critique of everyone since, many of them feminists, who have really focused on this tampon snafu to a point where it has overridden Sally Ride's actual accomplishments, because what the fuck does anyone else know about Sally Ride in the public consciousness? While also still leaning into that. From there, we go into the final story of the collection, which is called Hack Gold, Hack Silver, and is told from the perspective of Voyager 1. Voyager 1 has been found by aliens on the very edge of the solar system, and the story is split into Voyager 1 trying to communicate with her sister, Voyager 2, and telling the aliens her life story. This one made me cry a fair bit. Voyager 1 is real depressed, and the tone of this one is incredibly sad. It's a really devastating way to end this collection, but I think it really works. The whole collection works as a very loving tribute and also a very harsh critique of humanity. It's both a satire and a tribute to the ways that some humans anthropomorphize and feel real genuine affection for the vessels, the machinery, the objects that we send into space. But it also questions it, because how genuine can that affection be when these objects are being sent out against their theoretical will, only to eventually become space garbage? And it's really interesting to see Dovey explore the affection, the suspicion, the derision, sometimes the fucking hatred that these objects might feel back. It's weird, it's sad, it's beautiful, and the way that it's assembled makes it feel less like a collection of short stories than a novel told in 5 parts. Like, it's so thematically cohesive, but also there are recurring characters that appear in different stories that really, particularly by the end, really bring it together, making it feel like one narrative rather than 5. I really appreciate the kind of unspoken question in this book of how can you empathize so hard with an object but not the people around you? Like, what do you mean you cried over the death of curiosity but you also support mass deportation? Yeah, I just loved this so much. I enjoyed every second I spent reading it, even the ones where I was crying. I don't think this book is gonna work though for people who can't accept a certain amount of absurdity in their fiction. I do have another book to talk about, which I finished on the same day as Only the Astronauts, but I have run out of my allotted filming time for the day, so cue the outfit change. And we will talk about this in a second. Okay, so the other book I finished on the same day as Only the Astronauts was Y2K, How the 2000s Became Everything by Colette Shade. This is a really interesting collection of essays that managed to blend a sense of memoir with political, economic, and social nonfiction. It reflects on and explores the Y2K period, which has been defined here as being from about 1998 to 2008, from the perspective of the author, who in this book is both child and adult. Colette Shade was 11 years old at the turn of the millennium. I was 12. And in essays under different topics, we see young Colette navigating these various elements of the Y2K era, be it the rise of the internet, the fat phobia of the time, the emphasis on the sexy virgin, Y2K era environmentalism, the rise in nationalism post 9/11. Little Colette is pretty clueless about the broader implications of everything she's going through, but adult Colette is able to recontextualize her life with a view to the social, the political, and the economical. And I think that's really, really interesting from an objective perspective, but also this was a really personal read for me because she was recontextualizing my childhood and teenagerhood as well. This book gave me so many visceral flashbacks that I'm pretty sure I nearly discovered time travel. Sorry, there is a flock of birds going absolutely apeshit outside. But yeah, I really appreciated having that sort of era of my life recontextualized and slotted into the great timeline of the universe. I do consider myself quite a political person. I think I am probably more politically aware and engaged than the average person, probably. But I wasn't a politically active teenager. I grew up in a very conservative household. I mean, my dad was very loudly political, my brothers often are, and my mum was very much a please don't talk to me about politics person, so I think I probably did ingest a certain amount of politics was for men ideology early on. And I carried that political apathy through until probably about 2007, 2008, when I was at sort of late university. So at the very end of this Y2K era as defined in this book. So as far as American politics go, and unfortunately American politics do affect the entire fucking world, I have a pretty good grasp of the Obama years, the first Trump years, the Biden years, and now we're back at Trump again. But my memories of the Bush years were kind of hazy, and I don't remember Clinton at all, save the Monica Lewinsky thing, which happened when I was about 9, I think, which is when I learned what a blowjob was. So this book really triggered a bunch of memories about the Bush years and the media cycles around it, and how that in turn filtered through into Australian media and society. And I think this book paints quite a clear timeline of not just how we got from Bush to Trump, but from Clinton to Bush to Obama to Trump. And then Trump again. Like, this isn't something that has happened out of nowhere. This is such a cause and effect sequence of events. Same with the social and economic situations that we're in. Like, I feel like the slutty version of Britney and Christina's day is such a harbinger of the, like, conservative values we're being fed through the faux feminism of dark romance and popular romantasy. at the moment, which is not to say that dark romance and romantasy cannot be feminist in and of itself and that feminists can't enjoy it. But speaking in the mainstream, I'm seeing such a connection between the types of people who champion dark romance and certain romantasy as escapism while voting for Donald Trump, and the exploration of the glorification of wealth and of parading your wealth in the early 2000s, which has led to nothing but recession after recession after recession, is so interesting. This book was a really heavy read a lot of the time. It could also have been called a millennial's guide to disillusionment, despair, and eating disorders. It's wild to see that it has been 25 years since we as a society had hope for the future. And maybe it's because I was a kid then, and this is just how it is to be a kid all the time. But the last couple years of the 90s was so future focused. Everyone was so excited about this new millennium and what it was going to bring and what technology was going to do to like beautify the planet and ease our lives. You know, we banded together to fix the hole in the ozone layer, and Y2K itself was this incredible example of how scientists could work together to avoid global catastrophe. It was going to be a global age of prosperity, and then it really wasn't. Colette Shade said that she needed to write this book to understand the current moment, and I really see it. Anyway, this book was written really well. I really loved the combination of memoir and context. And if you were present for the Y2K era or you're curious about it, then I fully recommend this book. And I totally think this book fits in with my Sci-Fi-Bruary, rolls off the tongue, theme. Because if you have ever seen a music video from the year 1999, you will know that there are a lot of spaceships. Oh, and just so everyone knows, Smithers has been a slightly off-screen co-star in this whole segment. You're welcome. It is the 4th of March, and I am way behind on my filming, both because February turned out to be a bit of a doozy of a month, and also because I had no idea how to talk about this book and I kept putting off having to figure out a way to do so. That book is Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. This is literary science fiction told in 3 distinct strands. In the first, and in what is definitely presented as the main strand, is the story of Zilu, who is a Nigerian-American paraplegic woman who, at a very low point in her career as a kind of dissatisfied writer and professor at a college where she teaches writing, writes a novel that rockets her to superstardom in the publishing world, but also is like a breakout hit and supercharges her to celebrity in general. It's a thick book. There is a lot packed into this strand. Zilu's story covers a lot of ground, both in terms of like time and just the amount of stuff she has going on. Zilu is from a large immigrant family who are very ableist towards her and her wheelchair use. They are very resentful anytime they need to accommodate her or help her, but simultaneously they are completely against her trying to use any form of technology to increase her ability. They are very anti the idea of her being free from needing them. There's a bit of a romance, or at least a romantic relationship storyline. There's an exploration of culture, both with Zilu being Nigerian American, but also within her Nigerian identity itself, because her father is Igbo and her mother is Yoruba, and there's sort of a cultural hierarchical interplay there as well. There's commentary on the publishing industry, on the media, on internet culture, on cultural appropriation. There's a lot. There is a lot going on. It is very much Zilu's personal story. The next most prominent strand, or what I would call the B strand, is excerpts from Zilu's wildly best-selling book, Rusted Robots. It's presented in the book as being excerpts from this book, but the way it's written makes it feel like it is straight through, which does not quite make sense to me, because Rusted Robots is supposed to be 500 Microsoft Word pages. And this book is 400 something pages. And this is where I always struggle within the best-selling book within a book trope, because I cannot imagine people reading 500 pages of Rusted Robots and thinking, this is the greatest book of all time, which feels bitchy of me to say, but I do actually like it very much as it is presented in kind of a short novel form. Like, I don't think anything is particularly missing from the story that we don't get. But again, that's part of the trouble of the book within a book trope. Anyway, Rusted Robots is the story of Ankara, who is a female identifying humanoid android called a Hume. She exists in a post-human robot apocalypse, which is actually doing some really great things for the environment, but she is carrying the knowledge of a forthcoming apocalypse that will this time wipe out everything on Earth. And it is her quest to stop that from happening. However, the Humes are too busy being at war with the nobodies, who are the sort of digital AI. These chapters are sort of meted out over Zilu's story, and it is quite fun to watch the sort of interplay and similarities between Zilu's character and Ankara's character. And the third and final strand is a series of chapters that are kind of framed as interviews, but are very much monologues from Zilu's friends and family. Zilu's strand is written in very close third person, so I think these chapters are working to try and offer a sort of outsider perspective to Zilu's character and her life. But the main purpose of them seems to be to allude to this giant event in Zilu's future and building up tension to what seems very much to be a tragedy. Which I guess brings me to tell you about my feelings about this book, which I'm gonna try and do without revealing any spoilers, because this is a book that has a very sort of significant reveal in it. And because it only came out last month and it is quite chunky, I don't want to be the one to reveal the reveal to people who haven't read it yet. So yeah, for most of the book, I was broadly liking it, or at least I was very intrigued. I spent a whole day reading this book, which is not something I do very often anymore. Like, I had other stuff I had to be doing, but I just kept reading. So yeah, apart from the interview strand, which I didn't really like the way it was written, and I thought it was bringing very little to the narrative, I was liking this until about here. A few things happen in very quick succession, and I made a noise so loud that my partner heard me. I was like, oh no? I was like, oh no! I hated the ending. I think a lot of people are gonna love the ending. I know a lot of people think this book is very clever, and I'm not arguing that it isn't. I do think that conceptually it's a very interesting, possibly very cool idea. I just don't think it works with the book that is written. I think there are a lot of great ideas here that are introduced and then not really followed up on or paid off. I felt like whole parts of this book were negated by the ending. Like, I went back and I reread some passages with the fresh context of the ending, and they made even less sense to me. But the interesting thing is that that is not a universal experience. I was reading this at the same time as a bunch of friends, which was very fun. And for one of them, going back and rereading certain passages with the context of the ending made them make even more sense. And this is where it's hard to talk about without talking about it, because I see where those people are coming from. I just don't agree. So yeah, I am gonna stop trying to talk about this because it is not gonna get us anywhere in this video. In summary, I respect the massive ambition of this book. I don't think it fully pulled it off, but I would rather see a book try and do something big and interesting than not. I think it is a fabulous book club book because you really can talk about this book for hours with a bunch of friends, ideally with conflicting opinions. I think, aside from all of my other criticisms, that it is too long and could comfortably have lost about 50 to 100 pages. Overall, didn't like it. It has been bugging me for weeks now, but I'm not mad that I spent my time on it, if that makes any sense. Following death of the author, I read another book that I can't really talk about because it was a beta read for a friend who has a book coming out later this year. The version I read isn't the final version, so it feels like it would be inaccurate to talk about at this point, but I can broadly say that it is a banger. There's no cover to show off yet, there's been no reveal, but it is Until the Red Leaves Fall by Ali Parker, which is the follow-up novel to At the Foot of the Cherry Tree, which was a really big seller a couple of years ago, I think the year before last. I am sorry to say that Ali's books are only available in Australia at the moment. It's a shame. They should be available everywhere. She is doing great work spinning amazing historical fiction out of the Australian-Japanese experience. Her first book is based on the story of her grandparents. Her grandmother was one of the first Japanese women allowed into the country after World War II. Until the Red Leaves Fall is much more of a fictionalized story. It's not based on any real characters this time, but still drawing on the very real and very dark history of Australia's behavior and policies towards Japanese Australians. So if you're in Australia, keep an eye out for that soon, and if you're not in Australia, you can still order books from Australia. Until the Red Leaves Fall was definitely not a sci-fi in any way, shape, or form. But I made a return to sci-fi with my final book of the month. I mean, kind of, it's more spec fic, but I put spec fic under the sci-fi umbrella, so it counts. And that book was Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is the third Octavia E. Butler book that I have read, so I had a lot of faith that it was going to be very, 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 very good and make me feel very, 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 very bad. And I was right. This book is brilliant, and it made me really sad. Kindred tells the story of Dana, who is a young Black woman in the late 1970s who gets sucked through time into the antebellum South. That was all I knew about the book going in, but the actual premise is even more interesting because Dana isn't just zipped back into slavery apropos of nothing. She is called through time to save the life of her white ancestor. And when he's a little boy, this is not a complicated decision. She sees a little boy in trouble and she saves him. But she's called back to him over various points of his life. So she is watching this formerly fairly sweet and charming little boy grow up to be a slave owner in the antebellum South. And each time she goes back, she's sort of stuck there for longer and longer periods of time. So to start with, it's a few minutes and then a few hours and then it's months and months and months and months. And so she's simultaneously getting to know him better and seeing the reality of life under slavery. And while she's there, there is no role for her that doesn't have her being a slave. She cannot pose as anything else. So she is exposed to the harsh realities of this life, and she is forming community with the enslaved people around her while also having to keep their master alive. In order for her family line to exist, for her to exist and survive, she has to not only protect this man, but also facilitate the circumstances in which her great-great ancestor can be born. The ethics of this book are so complicated. Dana is in such an impossible situation because she is trying to do the best thing for everybody in a situation where there is not a single good thing for anybody. Even sacrificing herself and letting her ancestor die is not an easy answer or a solution of any kind, because there are enslaved families on his plantation, and if he dies without an heir, the entire plantation is being sold off. A fascinating exploration of the idea of like, what the fuck would you do in this situation? But I think the larger theme or topic that Butler was exploring in this book, which is yet again something that makes her books feel so modern and perpetually relevant, is the idea that a knowledge of history or a solid education or good intentions can save you from a white supremacist or fascist society, if that makes any sense. And that there is a remarkable speed with which a progressive or an ally will become complicit in a white supremacist system in order to save their own skin. Like, there is a period in which Dana's white husband travels back in time with her, and the speed with which this man starts to consider that maybe slavery wasn't as bad as he was always taught it was. And Dana, the longer that she is stuck on this fucking plantation in the past, starts to wonder how, if she is so educated and she has such good knowledge of everything that is going to happen in this period of time through to the next few decades, why can't she escape? Like, why is she so bad at being a rebellious slave? Dana begins her time on the plantation almost looking down on some of the slave women for not trying harder to escape, and then sort of over the course of time realizing that this is their only way to survive. And it is really wonderful watching, wonderful feels like the wrong word, but I really loved seeing her form community with these women. Like, that community itself was also very complicated. They weren't best friends, but there was a sense of sisterhood and survival there. Like, this is how we survive together. Reading this was a really nice sort of flip side to James by Percival Everett, which I read earlier in the year, which was really fantastic, but really focused on Black men. It was really nice to read a book that focused on Black women during this period, and one where they were allowed to be much more complex and fleshed out than just wives and rape victims. Other thing I thought was absolutely phenomenal about this book was the exploration of an abusive relationship. Rufus, who is Dana's ancestor, not that he knows that, comes to realize that Dana relies on him completely and that she is tied to him for some reason. And so as he gets older, he starts to really purposefully manipulate her. And the growth of their relationship over the book is just terrifying. By the end of this book, it feels like a horror story. And I mean that in the genre sense, not that slavery itself isn't a subject of complete and utter horror. So yeah, Octavia E. Butler, easily one of the greatest writers of modern history, often accused of being a prophet, but I think she was just paying attention. But my God, has this woman never written a husband I couldn't hate. And that, my friends, was Sci-Fi-Bruary. It was a good reading month, I think. Personally, it was quite an odd month. I and a friend got nominated for Australian Writers Guild Awards for 2 Neighbours episodes in the television serial category. Neighbours didn't win, and then Neighbours got cancelled. Unrelated, but I will say that the timing was personally comical. So yeah, Neighbours, the show I write for, has been cancelled again. There's a whole backstory. Amazon saved us from cancellation when Channel 5 cancelled us in 2021 or 2, and now they've cancelled us as well. So Neighbours will finish airing at the end of this year, 2025. My work will end in April. I will be fine, but it just sucks so much to see one of the few really consistent employers in this already tiny television industry go for good, knowing that it's probably not going to be replaced by anything new. Like, Amazon, prove me wrong, but I don't think that they are going to take the money that they were spending on Neighbours and funneling it into exciting new small Australian TV projects. But they fucking should, and I really do hope to be proven wrong. So that was February. If you read anything exciting this month, please drop a comment and let me know what it was so that I can check it out. If you're new here and you enjoyed what you saw, please like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Okay, who's still here? I feel like I was a little bit of a tease very early in this video where I mentioned some DNFs and I'm going to tell you what they were. The 2 I DNF'd from last month were the Stardust Grail and Hammerjang Luck, which were more sort of like it's not you, it's me situations. I really loved Yume Katase's debut novel, The Deep Sky, which I have read twice and was one of my favorite books of the year before last. And a bunch of friends had so many wonderful things to say about Hammerjang Luck. The problem is that these are both heist novels, and it turns out that I don't like heist novels. I don't know if you've noticed this about me, but I don't like fun very much, and both of these books were sort of setting themselves up to be fun. I may come back to this one eventually though, because people have said that the second half of the book is tonally very different to the first half, so we'll see. Either way, I will still be picking up the new book that Yume Katase has coming out, I think later this year. And the book I DNF'd this month, well, last month now because it's March currently, the book I DNF'd in February was Thrum by Meg Smitherman. I am going to say that if you find the writing in popular romantasy books to be good, then this book may be for you. It is unfortunately not for me. If a man-shaped person smirks within 100 pages of being introduced, then I don't want anything else but for his incredibly quick demise. And yet the only thing they ever get is laid.